Okay, so just so everybody knows, we are recording this, so this is being recorded. Hello, I'm Susan Spicka. I am the Executive Director of Education Voters, and welcome you tonight to talk about horse racing in Pennsylvania, the Racehorse Development Fund, and how we are subsidizing cruelty and could be spending this money in a much better way. So I just wanted to lay out a few ground rules. We are a very diverse group tonight of people who probably have very different opinions about a lot of things. So I hope that we can all just be respectful. I'm going to ask that everyone remain muted while Patrick is presenting and then while I present. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we will work on answering questions in the chat while we're presenting. And when we're done presenting, then we can open up to have people raise their hands, unmute, and ask questions. So what we're going to do is first hear from Patrick Batuello, and then I have a short presentation to talk about the Racehorse Development Fund, and then we will have questions. So without any further ado, I introduce you to Patrick, and I'm going to let him take over to start us off. So there you go, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. First off, good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us. I want to give you a brief history of how we started Horse Racing Wrongs, and where we are today, and what we have found over the years. So back in 2012, 2013, I was writing an animal rights blog for the local paper here in Albany, the Times-Union. And while researching for a post on horse racing, I found a real dearth of information. I also found that no organization was really targeting this industry. No one was taking on the horse racing industry the way, for example, we had been doing with Ringland Brothers for decades, the fur industry, many protests over many years, factory farming, animal testing, greyhound racing, Grey 2K, a wonderful organization, had come onto the scene back in 2000, but nobody was speaking for racehorses. So even though I have no background with horses, and I certainly was never involved in horse racing, I decided to step into the void and represent racehorses. The first thing I realized, obviously, is this is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is deeply entrenched in American society, going back a century and a half. So I had to come to the fight armed with facts. And the best way to get facts, for us was through FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. I started doing that right at the beginning with each of the racing commissions throughout the country, and I started compiling killed lists. So before we started doing this work, no one had any idea how many horses were dying on American tracks. They certainly didn't know the names, the dates, the locations, the details until we came on the scene. So from these lists going back to 2014, we started to gain exposure because of this work, with the media. And from there, we've put our name firmly on the map in the animal rights community. And for us, it's always been about two things: education and exposure. We had to expose the industry, obviously, but educate people. Horse racing in America, if you were to ask the average person out there, not a horse racing fan, not an animal rights activist, just the average person, what they think of horse racing, they would say, well, maybe there's too many drugs, maybe it's a bit corrupt, but they always talk about it in terms of sport, because that's the way it's been sold to us, as just another American sport. It's conditioning. And I'm not immune to that. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I was a huge sports fan, and I didn't follow horse racing year round, but I do remember cheering on Affirmed and Seattle Slew as they went for the Triple Crown. And I certainly was aware of Secretariat. In fact, Secretariat was named the 35th greatest athlete of the 20th century by ESPN. Horse racing was on the cover of Sports Illustrated numerous times. So it was sold to me and to everyone else as just another sport. In short, this is just brilliant marketing. In fact, stripped to its core, horse racing is base animal exploitation, animal cruelty, and animal killing. So I felt it was my job, our job as Horse Racing Wrongs, to expose that. Again, getting back to that exposure. So you may ask, what's wrong with horse racing? Well, let's start with the forced separation. So these animals are manufactured, and that's the only word for it. It's artificial. It's all artificial manufacture of animals. They are forcibly separated from their herds at about the age of 1. From there, their servitude begins. They are thrust into an intensive training regimen at 18 months. And to give you a bit of context here, the typical horse does not fully mature. His bones are not done growing. His plates are not done fusing until around 6. These are 18-month-old equines, which on the maturation chart corresponds to a 5 or 6-year-old child. And again, this is intensive training because they had to be prepped to race at 2. Because if they're not on the track, if they're not out there earning, then they're worthless. So it's everything is accelerated. So we have this incessant grinding of these unformed bodies. And I get varying detail from racing commissions throughout the country, but the ones who give me full necropsy reports, states like Maryland, Kentucky, and California, I can't tell you how many times these 2, 3, 4-year-old horses, these pubescent equines, are dying with chronic conditions like osteoarthritis or a degenerative joint disease. That speaks to that incessant grinding. So one of my big focuses, I would say, is that there seems to be too much attention paid to drugging in horse racing. And so what I've tried to do is explain to people that the killing is built into the system. It's the way the horses are bred, and of course it's racing them on these unformed bodies. And where the drugs do come into play is when you have horses that are developing these conditions like arthritis at a young age. You have to inject them with things to keep them on the track and to keep them earning. So yes, the drugs come in, but it's more secondary as opposed to the primary reason, and that is that these animals are woefully immature. Then, of course, we have the commodification. These animals are simple commodities. They are things to be bought, sold, traded, and dumped whenever and however their people decide. And in fact, the average horse will change hands several times over the course of his so-called career, and this adds anxiety and stress to an already anxious, stressful existence. The worst of it, I think, for me, is the confinement and the isolation. So horses, like their greyhound counterparts, are kept locked for over 23 hours a day. For horses, they're in tiny 12-by-12 stalls, and they are isolated. They may be able to see their peers, but they're not able to interact like a horse would in a natural setting. They're not able to graze in an open field, frolic and play. Remember, these are social herd animals. So it's that everyday, unremitting confinement and isolation that for me is the worst of it. And closely correlated to that is the negation. So virtually all of the horse's natural instincts and desires are thwarted, creating an emotional and mental suffering that is brought home with crystal clarity in the stereotypies that we commonly see in confined racehorses: the bobbing, the weaving, the swaying, cribbing, as horses do with the air sucking. These are clear signs of mental anguish, similar to what we used to see with the ringland elephants. So these are terribly unhappy, depressed animals. And then, of course, we have whipping. So what's done openly at a racetrack would land a person in jail if he were to whip his dog in the park. And that brings us to the fact that animal cruelty statutes do not apply to the horse racing industry. So these industries like horse racing and dog racing are left to police themselves. And of course, there are inherent conflicts of interest when regulatory agencies that are comprised of owners, breeders, trainers, or people who know owners, breeders, and trainers are asked to pass judgment on misdoings. So we have all these things happening to the horse, prior to them ever setting foot on the track. And then, of course, when they're racing, that's where the killing starts. So our research, our work indicates that over 2,000 horses are killed racing or training across America every year, over 2,000. That's almost 6 every single day. And again, before Horse Racing Wrongs, no one knew the scale and scope of the problem. So we're talking about Pennsylvania here tonight. So I want to give you some numbers in the Keystone State. In just the past 5 years, these are the death numbers that I got directly from the Department of Agriculture here in Pennsylvania. Keep in mind, though, that this is surely not all of the horses who have died at Pennsylvania racetracks. Some horses are injured at the track and then taken off-site to the owner's farm or the trainer's farm and euthanized there. Those are not reflected in these numbers. And in addition, there are, as I found out through many years of doing this work, slipshod record keeping, either at the track or state level. So just keep in mind that this is at a bare minimum the horses who have died in Pennsylvania. In 2017, 107 horses perished at Pennsylvania tracks. In 2018, 98. In 2019, 117. In 2020, 74, but of course that was greatly affected by COVID. And through only the first 6 months of this year, 2021, 54 horses have died at Pennsylvania tracks. Now, these are just numbers on a ledger, basic facts on a page. But I think it's imperative that the public, yourselves included, understand how these horses are dying, hear the details and the particulars, and fully appreciate the suffering that these sentient beings are enduring prior to expiring. So begging your patience, I'd like to share with you a small sampling of horses who have died at Pennsylvania racetracks in just the past few years. It may be a bit uncomfortable to hear, but remember how it must have felt for these horses to have actually experienced it. And also, these 20 or so horses that I'm about to relay to you gives you a good illustration of the various ways that racehorses die. Most people think that horses, break their legs and it's a quick, shot of pentobarbital and, it's over. Yes, of course, there are limb fractures, and that's probably the majority of horses who die, but they also die of various other ways. Sudden cardiac events, their hearts give out. These are animals, again, mostly still in puberty. They die of things like pulmonary hemorrhage, a blunt force head trauma, broken necks, severed spines, ruptured ligaments. And you'll hear some of that in this 2 or 3 minute list that I'm about to read to you. So again, begging your patience, here are some of the horses who have died at Pennsylvania tracks over the past few years. Quiet Title was killed training at Penn National. And again, the information I'm going to give you comes directly from the Department of Agriculture. So the department writes, horse fell and broke neck, blood coming from ears. Digital Z-Tam was killed racing at Pocono, a harness track, became weak and fell to the ground, had trouble breathing, died within 2 minutes. Gold Teak was killed at Parks, was involved in a 3-horse collision, broken back, death due to vertebral fracture and exsanguination. She bled out. Digger's Jigger, killed at Parks, was involved in a 3-horse collision, that same collision. She was found dead in her stall next morning, and the department writes, death due to trauma and exsanguination. Again, she bled out the next day. Great White Buffalo was killed racing at Presque Isle. Both front fetlocks attached by skin only, leaving bones exposed and covered with ground-in dirt. Age Fluffy died prior to a race at Presque Isle, fractured spine. The department added, gastric ulcers are common in racehorses. I would go further and say that gastric ulcers almost appear in every single racehorse. Again, speaking to that anxiety and stress that these animals are enduring. They continued to write, these were extensive, these gastric ulcers, and the pain may have caused this horse to rear and flip over. And that was prior to a race, by the way. She was getting ready to be put on the track with these gastric ulcers. Gambler 5 killed at Penn, multiple tendons severed and shredded, multiple ligaments torn, sesamoid fractured into multiple pieces. South Philly Magic killed at Parks. Horse had a broken neck and was dead when the vet arrived. Queen Patron killed racing at Penn, compound fracture, exposed bones covered in dirt and debris. Surfside Chic killed racing at Parks, fractured neck. Floyd Hanover at the Meadows, it says trainer found horse dead in barn. We see that quite often. Again, these are still active racehorses in between races, and most of them still in puberty, simply found dead in the morning. Janot was killed racing at Penn, profuse hemorrhage from both nostrils. This horse, by the way, died without euthanasia. He just simply bled to death. Retrade was killed racing at Presque Isle, broke both front legs. Top Street killed racing at Penn, dropped dead post-race. Hokey Fever killed training at Penn, open fracture of radius with large piece found on the ground. Happy Anniversary killed racing at Harrah's, another harness track, suffered a seizure and expired. Elicious killed racing at Penn, collapsed just past the finish line, was dead when vet reached her. She was only 3 years old. Diva Drama killed training at Parks, thoracic vertebral fracture with spinal cord compression. Play Me a Memory killed training at Parks, severe open fracture with fragments protruding through the skin and dirt embedded in the wound. And finally, just this past April 28th at Penn, Brandywine's Secret, quote, suffered catastrophic injuries to both front legs, but was still walked into the ambulance with 2 broken legs. Again, I fully appreciate that it's difficult to hear, but I think it's absolutely crucial that the public, the media understands how these horses are dying, the details. It's all in the details. So for the horses who are lucky to get off the track alive, most will suffer an even worse fate, if you can imagine. Most of them, we're talking 10 to 15,000 every year, will land in equine hell, the slaughterhouse. So what happens at a slaughterhouse? They are stuffed into trailers. At this point, they're nothing more than meat. They are allowed by the USDA to go up to 36 hours without food, water, or rest. They must travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles, because we currently have no equine slaughterhouses on US soil. The last ones closed in 2007. They have not, by the way, been prohibited, just defunded. So we ship them to Canada and Mexico. When they arrive at these slaughterhouses, they are obviously terrified. Nothing could prepare them for what awaits. They are shuffled in one by one into what's called a kill box. There, they will either be shot with a .22 caliber rifle or a retractable metal bolt to the brain. But often this takes multiple tries to either render them unconscious or to outright kill them, because the terrified horses are flailing and make difficult targets. And often this is exacerbated by the blood making the floors slippery beneath them. Remember now that the next horse in line is watching one of his brethren dying in this horrific manner. They are then hoisted, shackled, hoisted, hung upside down. They have the carotid artery slashed, and they are bled out and finally butchered for their meat. The whimsical names and cheering crowds a bitter lifetime ago. And by the way, there is footage of horses still conscious while they are being hung upside down and bled out. Again, this is very, very difficult subject matter, but people need to hear this. People need to understand that every bet that they place, every admission ticket that they purchase, and here in Pennsylvania, which Susan will certainly talk about, even going to the Racino and pulling that slot's arm is supporting this animal cruelty, and animal killing. So when we're looking at animal or horse racing in a more broad view, I like to look at animal entertainment over the past few years. And what we have seen is Ringling Brothers has shuttered its doors for good after 146 years of abusing animals. We have seen Blackfish exposing SeaWorld for what it is and leaving that company in precipitous decline. They have ended their captive breeding program for orcas. We have seen rodeo bans in cities as diverse as Pittsburgh and Sacramento and San Francisco and Fort Wayne, Indiana. And we have seen the National Aquarium vowing to release all of their captive dolphins to a seaside sanctuary by the end, I think, of this year. And most relevant to the issue at hand, we have seen dog racing all but eliminated off the American landscape. Back in 2018, Floridians were given a referendum up-down vote on dog racing. At the time, Florida had 11 of the final 21 tracks in the country. The vote went overwhelmingly against the dog racing industry, 2-1. That's in a state that can't decide anything more than 50-50, as you know. By the end of next year, there will be 2 dog tracks left in the entire country. What's more, dog racing has been outright prohibited on moral grounds in 41 states in this nation. Imagine that, prohibited on moral grounds in 41 states. And yet, we have the exact same industry, the horse racing industry, swimming along merrily under this banner of sport, the sport of kings. In fact, I would argue that horse racing, because of slaughter, is actually worse than dog racing. So that's our great challenge as advocates. We need to recondition the American mind to get them to stop thinking of this as a sport. I mean, there's no other accepted sport on the planet that treats its athletes this way. Of course, it's absurd to talk about horse racing as a sport, but that's our challenge. It's reported in the sports pages. NBC Sports covers the Triple Crown. As I mentioned, Sports Illustrated, ESPN cover it as a sport. So we need to educate and expose. We've made a lot of progress because of our work, because of our unique work, because of the protests that we have sponsored throughout the country. I think we're up to 25 to 30 tracks in over 20 states. Horse Racing Wrongs has been present. Because of all this, we have been on HBO, CNN, ESPN. We've done numerous interviews for print, radio, TV. And which I think is a sign of the progress that we are making, probably the single greatest sign. In the past year, the Washington Post and the Philadelphia Inquirer are 2 of the biggest, most powerful newspapers in the entire country, have called for horse racing to end, not to be reformed, but to end. So the wind is at our backs. I think that we can see where this is going. Demographically, horse racing is unsustainable. They are not drawing the younger generations. And the reason for that is twofold. Clearly, there's competition for the gambling dollar that they didn't face 50, 60 years ago, casinos, lotteries, and now sports betting. But second, and I think equally important, are changing sensibilities. So the younger generations get it. They may not be vegan or animal rights activists per se, but they look at horse racing and see, we're still whipping these animals so we can bet. Why can't we just go to a casino? That's a good question. So demographically, it's really bad. And that's why they have turned to state legislatures for lifelines. And Susan, of course, is going to address this, but about 70% of the US horse racing industry is being propped up by corporate welfare, about 70%. All 6 tracks in Pennsylvania, 9 of the 11 tracks here in New York, Ohio, West Virginia, Louisiana, right across the country. Major subsidies. And without those subsidies, horse racing would have failed, or the bulk of horse racing would have failed years ago. So again, our mission is twofold in that we need to change hearts and minds, but we also need to change laws. And that's where, Susan and her group are so instrumental. And so I'll turn it over to Susan. I'll be happy to answer any questions after Susan's done presenting. Again, I know that this is an open and shut case if people would just learn the facts as we report them. I always ask people, read our website every day for 1 week. Just spend 10 minutes on our website, just for 1 week. And I guarantee you that you will come away with the conclusion that this is evil. I know that's a strong word, it's an inflammatory word, but it's evil, it's horrific. And so go to horseracingwrongs.org and learn the truth. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And when the Ed voters came at this, looking at the issue as a taxing issue and a not good and productive use of taxpayer dollars. And then as we learned more about it, and then we met Patrick, we came to understand, thanks to all of the work of Horse Racing Wrongs, like just the incredible, horrific cruelty that is subsidized in Pennsylvania by 240 million taxpayer dollars every single year. And so I am going to actually share some slides so that we can talk about the horse racing industry and like what is going on in Pennsylvania and how we can work to kind of come together to both spend money in a much more productive way and also at the same time, help diminish this cruelty. So I think it might seem odd that an education organization is working on this issue of horse racing and horse cruelty, but what we are is we're focused on mobilizing public will to ensure that we have a quality public education and the opportunity to learn for all students in Pennsylvania. And we are always looking for money from different sources that could be reallocated so we don't have to talk about raising taxes to do the things that need to be done in Pennsylvania. And so we came across the Racehorse Development Fund I did back in 2011. And so it's been a long-standing issue for Ed voters. And so I'm going to give an overview of the Racehorse Development Fund and then talk about some other things. So we'll have some slides here. So in 2004, Act 71 in Pennsylvania authorized casino gambling in Pennsylvania. And so we currently have 13 casinos. 6 are racinos, which are casinos affiliated with racetracks. So horse racing is part of a really large and expanding gaming system in the Commonwealth. So we have table games, internet gaming, sports betting, the PA lottery. And this gaming is a big money maker for the state, bringing in billions of dollars of revenue. But horse racing is actually a loser. And horse racing is costing Pennsylvania millions of dollars each year. And so where does the money come from, the $240 million a year that subsidizes the racing industry? It comes from a tax on slot machines. So in Pennsylvania, all of our casinos have slot machines, and we get about $2.4 billion in revenue. The tax goes into Harrisburg, and then these dollars are distributed by law. So the Act 71 explains how this money has to go out. So the bulk of it goes to property tax relief. Some of it goes to community impact funds, economic development, and then we can see that about 11 to 12% each year goes into the Racehorse Development Fund. So I think it's important to note that casinos that don't have racetracks, they still contribute this money. So racetrack or no, these casinos are paying into the Racehorse Development Fund. And tax dollars fund every single aspect of horse racing. So the largest expenditures for purses, which are the cash prizes that are awarded to the owners of the winning horses. So we can see this is for 2019, we had about $160 million of Pennsylvania tax dollars that were awarded as cash prizes to horse owners. About $80 million of that is an independent fiscal office estimates went to horse owners who don't even live in Pennsylvania. So it's not uncommon to see somebody flying a horse in from Saudi Arabia, a horse comes flying in from Dubai, goes to a track, it races, its owner collects money, and that horse gets back on an airplane and it flies away. And the same thing happens with, a billionaire from California could fly in, or a millionaire from Florida. These are not, this is so lucrative for horse owners that it is worth it for them to fly their animals in. Purses have grown substantially. Before Act 71 in 2004, the purse money came from betting dollars, which is what seems like it should come from, right? But now 89% of this money comes from tax dollars. A first place winner would typically get about $27,000. And then once you add in the breeder incentives, a single winning horse in a single race can win $56,000. Now, $56,000 would pay for 2 full years of college, of tuition, room, board, books, and expenses for a student at a state system university, or that money can be used to pay for one cash prize for one winning horse. The tax dollars also pay for promotion and for drug testing, health and pension benefits. So every single bit of the horse racing industry is subsidized. And in spite of all of this money being poured into the industry and this law that was intended to strengthen the industry, we are seeing by every indication this industry is continuing to decline. So horse tracks average about 700 visitors a day. If we compare that to a minor baseball league team, they have about 5,000 people who go to a game each game. There are fewer horses bred every year, which is probably, we'll see, as Patrick has said, that's probably actually a really good thing. But the idea was that if you put more money into the industry, there would be more horses bred and there are fewer horses. And betting is down, and we can see when we look at the wagers, we can see that there is just the interest in betting on horses in Pennsylvania is just bottoming out. There are so many other options that people have that they are choosing to spend their gambling dollars on, that this isn't even, the only reason that we have horse racing is because it is being so heavily subsidized. It's not because people are interested in it in Pennsylvania. And so what the horsemen say, and when they go into Harrisburg and they talk to lawmakers, they say that horse racing creates all these jobs. They say that this is so important to our agricultural industry and what would happen if these subsidies went away? What would happen to agriculture in Pennsylvania? Well, in fact, there are very few jobs that are created by the horse racing industry, about 10,000. Only about 1,700 are full-time. And if we just compare that to the tourism industry, that creates 310,000 jobs a year. Tourism industry does not get $240 million a year in subsidies. Horses are a very small share of the agricultural economy. We have 1 million milk cows in Pennsylvania. We have about 88,000 horses. We have about $2 billion in sales of milk cows and about $44 million in sales of racehorses, of horses. And the other thing is that racehorses are only about 1/3 of the equine economy. So there are more jobs and more revenue from shows and competitions and horses that are owned by people who love their animals, who keep them, like on a little paddock or on their own little horse farm. There are more jobs in that than there are in horse racing, yet every owner of a recreational horse gets $0 in tax subsidies. And somehow or another, they still manage to be able to buy the hay for their animals, to board their animals, and to pay for all the expenses that go along with their animals. And I just want to reiterate, about $160 million of this money is cash prizes for wealthy horse owners, and half of it goes to people who live out of state. So if you want to say that you're supporting the Pennsylvania agricultural industry, some of these out-of-state horses might board in Pennsylvania sometimes, but a lot of these horses come in and they leave and they take our tax dollars with them. And then we get down to what are we subsidizing? We are subsidizing this cruelty. So about a year ago, the Inquirer did a story and found that there had been, over a period of 10 years, 1,400 dead horses at Pennsylvania tracks. In 2019, the 59 deaths at parks were higher than in Santa Anita, which got all this national attention. Parks is on track to have more horse deaths in 2021 than it had in 2019. Then we get into this whole, the raids and the contraband. So, we had COVID and no one was checking up on anything. And then there was a raid and they found dirty syringes and needles and drugs in horse stalls. And none of that belongs anywhere near these animals, but these were the trainers, these were the people who love their horses. You know, it is really a misrepresentation to say that the breeders and the owners love their horses and that we have to, you know, keep supporting these individuals because they take such good care of their horses. Because, you know, I live in Shippensburg, which is the home of one of those, a kill pen, which is the last stop before an animal, the horses are sent to slaughter in Canada. And so every month, there's like a little Facebook group, and people who rescue horses, they go there, they can like look for the tattoo on their lips, and they can find out who is in the kill pen. This owner has horses that are not allowed to be seen by anybody, so they go in the back and no one ever gets to know that they're there. And then there are other horses that I think he pretty much sells by the pound, right? So if he can get more money from a rescue organization than he can get from the butcher in Canada, then you can go and rescue a horse. But these are horses that have raced, that have won a lot of money for their owners, as you can see here, and I'll show you another slide. I mean, this is every month. I mean, it is dozens and dozens of horses. It is an endless stream of horses that go through there. And they say we've ID'd these standard breds. A lot of times these animals will go from racing, then they go to be Amish horses where they like are ground into the dirt by the Amish. And then when the Amish can't use them anymore because they're so used up, they take them and sell them to this kill pen, which is, I drove by the other day, and it is a really incredibly grim place where they just load horses on these like double-decker little trailers and drive them away. These horses, most of them have raced in Pennsylvania. They go to a track and then they go down these claiming races, and then they make less and less money, and then nobody wants to claim them, and then they go someplace and they get auctioned off. So I think for these standard bred and thoroughbred breeders to claim that they love their horses, you know, whoever bred this animal should be responsible for ensuring that this animal doesn't get sent to turn into meat in Canada, and that's really not happening. So to just summarize our issue with the Racehorse Development Fund, we've spent almost $3.3 billion since 2005 underwriting the racehorse industry. There is little economic benefit. It failed to meet the goals of the law. It contributes to the injury, death, and slaughter of horses, and there are better uses of $240 million. And I just want to talk about one of those uses. Governor Wolf has proposed a scholarship program that would provide scholarships to students who are attending our public state system of higher education universities, our 14 state-owned universities, which are the most affordable option for students who want to get a 4-year degree in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania for higher education, so this is where EdVoters comes in. This is why we are involved in the horse racing industry issue. State spending per student for higher education is 33% less than it was pre-recession. So you look up and you can see that Pennsylvania is right here at the top. As with it's just who we are. Our legislature doesn't like to fund education. So families, as the cost of higher education has been shifted away from a shared responsibility through universities receiving state funding onto the shoulders of individual families, families are really hard pressed to absorb these rising costs, especially families of color. So if we look at table 1, the average net price at a public 4-year university as a share of median household income in 2018 is 34% of an average family's income. So imagine wanting to send your child to college and you find that you have to spend 34% of your income in order to pay for that. But it's even worse for families of color, where it's 56% of Black families' median household income and 48% of a Hispanic family's income. And so what does that mean? When tuition increases, when we have weak wage growth, the diminishing value of financial aid, college is less affordable and accessible. So students are deterred from enrolling. This potentially harms students of color and reduces campus diversity, and it is very likely deterring low-income students in particular from enrolling. And so we are looking at a looming nurse shortage in Pennsylvania. We are looking at a looming teacher shortage because we do not have students who can afford to go to college to get these degrees. And then here we are In Pennsylvania, graduates once again, year after year, have the highest student debt in the nation. So a typical student in Pennsylvania will graduate, this was in 2017, it was $36,000. I think the latest figure I saw was $38,000. That is the average amount of student debt that a college graduate carries in Pennsylvania. And so what can we do? So if there are studies that show when you increase state financial aid and target it to students' need, a study found that a $1,000 increase in grant aid reduces the likelihood that a student will drop out of college by 9.2%. And there are other studies that have found similar effects, saying that aid targeted to low-income students can boost college retention and graduation rates. And so Governor Wolf's proposal is to take not the whole Racehorse Development Fund, but to take the money that is used for cash prizes and for breeders' incentives and to reallocate that money to providing scholarships to students who attend the public universities. And so just to like show our little contrast here, which is the better use of public funds? Right now, horse owners, a typical horse owner in Pennsylvania receives $15,000, over $15,000 in state tax money, while a student who attends a public university receives about a third of that. And each track receives about $39 million in tax money if we divide that Racehorse Development Fund up, while each university campus receives $34 million. So, you know, I have a hard time understanding why this is happening. It just does not make sense. And so when we look at what are we funding in Pennsylvania, we have these incredibly wealthy people, technology entrepreneur from Texas, a Delaware attorney, a Kentucky millionaire. They bring their horses in, they race them, they take them home, and they bring millions of our tax dollars with them. We have deaths, we have syringes, we have corruption. And instead of funding this, what we need to fund in Pennsylvania is this. We need to fund our young people going to college, getting the skills and the training and the knowledge that they need so they can graduate to become the professionals that are going to live in our communities and pay their taxes and really create a vibrant state. We need to be funding this instead. And so what's the solution? So at a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing in 2020 that the Department of Agriculture had, Secretary Redding indicated that after $3 billion of spending over the years, it is appropriate to believe that the industry should be self-sustaining. And we agree that that's a reasonable position. So we are advocating for the Pennsylvania legislature to repeal the law that sends 12% of the money tax slots to the Racehorse Development Fund, and then to reallocate those funds to support Nellie Bly scholarships for students of the state system universities. And ultimately, we need to create a self-sufficient, right-sized horse racing industry that is not only existing and being propped up by taxpayer money. And so the next step is this is how I think we're going to start this. State lawmakers need to hear from their constituents. It's one thing to have like a little email letter that's just sent. What really is going to move the needle is having people who care about this issue sitting down and taking the time to write an email or to write a snail mail letter, sending it to your lawmaker, getting a response, and then saying, I would really like to set up a meeting with you either via Zoom or in person, however they're doing their meetings, and sit down and have a conversation and ask whether they support the horsemen or do they support Pennsylvania students and families. And I will tell you that the horsemen, they pour an extraordinary amount of money into both Democrats and Republicans' campaign coffers. They have a lot of money. Like when you get $240 million in tax dollars every year, you can afford to take that money and you can afford to dole it around. So the lobby is extraordinarily powerful. They have really done a good job of messaging this as an agricultural issue and like we're just good horse-loving people and we're tied to the hay farmers. And I think that that's really not the case. And I think that there is now a new awareness in Harrisburg about this issue. We don't have money to waste anymore. Like you can't justify spending the money this way. And so I guess I would just invite everybody, this is my contact information, and I will send a follow-up email after the webinar with a video and some more information for you. But I would really encourage you to take some time to really think about meeting with your lawmakers. And then there are some other activities that we are going to be doing that, I'll reach out to you later. But I think the first and most important thing is for people to start talking to their lawmakers so that we can pull both Democrats and Republicans away from their support and really show them the choice that they have to make. So I am done. I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments that you'd like to, anything anybody would like to say. This is a lot. It is a very heavy topic, and I appreciate people coming out to listen to this. It's a lot. But we're happy to answer questions if anybody has them.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Tina.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay, so we have Karen. Yep. Hi, Karen. Would you like to ask a question? Yep.
Yeah, I live in Pennsylvania, and I've been sending letters for years to my representatives. I saw Patrick's, I follow Horse Racing Wrongs. I sent letters about the letter that was written from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I quoted just about everything that was said by Patrick. Sent it to Governor Wolf that I support this. This is a bipartisan issue, sent to Republicans, Democrats. Been doing this for about 2 years now. Really haven't gotten anywhere. Tried to send letters to the editor, haven't gotten them published. But I know it's persistence, and I know there's a lot of other problems going on in the world right now. And I'm feel so bad for horses in general. And it just seems like our priorities, it just seems like there's so much going on right now. And that's not to say anything, but I think that adds to a lot of where their minds are in the government, to be honest with you. And my whole contention about this whole situation is, and maybe Patrick can answer this, but I totally support you. And like I said, everything that he mentioned, I have gotten in letters and have done this for a few years now. I get, well, we'll take your whatever you're saying, we'll take it, and they really don't get back to you. Like you said, maybe you need a meeting with them or something like that. But why are horses why are they categorized as livestock? I think, to me, that's, and I do like all animals, even cows and sheep and everything, and I'm a vegan, but I think they see animals as disposable when they feel the cows are getting killed all the time and everything. They just see horses in the same respect. They see them as just livestock that can be used and thrown away. And I think that's the biggest problem. And I know there's laws that protect livestock. And I know the Farm Bill changed it, I think, in 2018 to categorize them as that. But I think that's a huge disservice to horses. Because to me, horses are one of the most abused animals that we have. Even the roundups and everything, I follow all that. So that's what I want to say. But I appreciate this. I appreciate this meeting because I've been following Horse Racing Wrongs for a couple years now.
Well, first, Karen, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your support and your unwavering commitment to helping horses. Please don't get discouraged. We are making progress. It's slow, but we are making progress. When we first started, we were dismissed as animal rights extremists, crazies. We were admonished to work with the industry to help better itself, to change the rules and to enact reforms. And we said, no, this is no different than dog racing. It has to go. And as I mentioned, the Washington Post and the Philadelphia Inquirer, those are major victories. The editorial boards, and without boasting, we had a big influence on both of those boards. I spent quite a bit of time with the Washington Post in the week prior to that editorial coming out. And, my language, my tone was infused in that editorial. And again, that's not to brag, it's just to show you that we are making progress. So we need to change hearts and minds first. And then working with groups like Susan's, that is so crucial because we need to change the laws. Obviously, we could convince 90% of the public that horse racing is cruel and it has to go. And as long as these subsidies are on the books, nothing is going to change. The horses will continue to suffer and die. So we need to get those subsidies stripped. And again, progress in that Governor Wolf, the top politician in one of the top states in this country, called for these subsidies to be stripped 2 years ago. Major, major progress. We're working here in New York with a large coalition going after the subsidies in the Empire State. It's got to be done on a state-by-state basis, and we feel like we are, incrementally making progress. Remember, Grade 2K formed in 2000. Here we are 21 years later, and they're just about done here in America, but it took 20 years. And that was dog racing, which never had the cachet of horse racing. So, it's going to take some time, but please stay at it. Don't ever give up. The horses desperately need each and every one of us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I won't give up. That's
Thank
just
you. Thank you.
the way I am. Just won't.
And I'm going to follow up with you tomorrow, Karen, to see if maybe we can work on getting a letter to the editor in some place. So I'll send you an email tomorrow and we can see what we can do with that. And I see Gina has a hand up. If you'd like to unmute, Gina.
Sure. Hi, can you hear me all?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
First of all, thank you, Patrick, Nicole, and Horse Racing Wrongs. You have been making huge progress. I think you're being really modest, Patrick, when you say that the progress has been somewhat slow. As a former industry insider that grew up in the business in the 60s and of course was heavily involved with it, I can say with 100% certainty that years ago, if anyone spoke out against horse racing, especially here in Ontario, Canada, where they were receiving $345 million a year of taxpayers' money, I'm telling you, the gauntlet would come down with you. I mean, you wouldn't even speak out about it, especially if you're inside the industry. You can forget about it. But when I got out, of course, I made up for all those years, as Horse Racing Wrongs knows. But I'm just saying, they are critical in the path to end horse racing. But so are you, Susan, and so is your organization. I mean, how can you possibly justify giving money, all this money to this industry when students are getting a third of the same amount of money from the public coffers? Like as Patrick has mentioned, I really feel that ending the funding is actually going to end horse racing. A lot of people know, not everybody, but a lot of people know, especially in the industry, that the killing has been going on for years. And this has been going on for a really long time. And if a video like Happy Happy Bee, which is on Patrick's website, does not do it, then nothing will. Nothing will. The only thing that will is, of course, promoting and educating, which Horse Racing Wrong does in the moral aspect, but also this whole money, of tons of taxpayers' money going to support this business. I believe that that's the key. And that's why I've joined this meeting tonight, because it's just so nice seeing the progress that's being made. Thank you to everyone for attending and for listening to my little rant.
No, thank you, Gina. You've been wonderful over the years, supporting us, and your knowledge is unsurpassed on horse racing. And you have been, sounding the alarm about subsidies from the very beginning. So, absolutely. And look, I look at this issue, the subsidy issue, as a triple wrong. Number one, it's anti-capitalism. It's anti-free market. We are propping up a clearly, decidedly non-essential industry. Number two, it's all coming at the expense of school children. Hundreds of millions of dollars a year across the country are being used to prop up horse racing at the expense of education. And number three, of course, horses are being abused and killed in the process. It's an absolutely unimpeachable argument. It's just a question of educating legislators, because most legislators are unaware of these laws. They were enacted, as Susan said, 15, 16 years ago, New York, Pennsylvania, other states. So they're just unaware of this. And back then it was very easy for the industry to lobby and say, look, if you don't help us here, we're having trouble competing with casinos and lotteries. If you don't help us, you're going to be responsible for putting thousands of people out of work. Well, first of all, they pull a lot of these numbers out of thin air. And as Susan and Sharon have pointed out, what, 10,000 in a workforce of how many millions, Susan, is it? You know, it's ridiculous. But secondly, and this is my answer, when I testified before the New York State Senate 2 years ago, one of the senators who happened to be from the Saratoga region asked that question, well, what do you say to the people that you intend to put out of work? And, you know, I said, well, first off, it's not that I'm insensitive, you know, to, you know, hardworking people, especially on the backstretch, but most of these jobs are not good jobs. They're very low paying. A lot of these people who work on the backstretch actually live right there on site. And a Maryland TV station did an investigation a couple of years back. I think it was at either Laurel or Pimlico, showing, you know, deplorable living conditions, you know, exposed wiring, mold, just terrible living conditions. But more important is that money and jobs should not factor into a discussion on morality. And ultimately, this is a moral issue. So each American has to answer, is this right or is this wrong that we are abusing and killing horses for $2 bets? And if the answer is it is wrong, then all talk of money and all talk of jobs must be discarded out of hand.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Gina. It's just, you know, I think that there are people who've been in the trenches with this a lot longer than I have, and I'm just grateful for everybody who's put in the time. And so we had another question that somebody put in the chat, like what we think about as the process in the year ahead. We have not talked with the governor's office, but it is my belief that he will once again put forth the Nellie Bly Scholarship Funds. And in Pennsylvania, for those of you who are in Pennsylvania, last year, our state system of higher education was in such not good financial shape that we had to have 6 universities consolidate down into 2. And there was a lot of awareness, public awareness that was raised around the issue of unaffordable higher education and enrollment decreasing because students just couldn't afford to go to college. So I'm imagining that Governor Wolf is going to put forth the Nellie Bly scholarships again, and then they will become part of the budget process. We also have an election coming up in 2022. So I would imagine that there just are a lot of different issues that people run on. There are a lot of, you know, like challengers and incumbents, and that this could become an issue that could be part of people's platforms. And, you know, we've had one bill introduced by Senator Wayne Fontana, to fund the Nellie Bly Scholarship Funds. I don't have that at the tip of my tongue, I'm sorry. I can follow up with that tomorrow. And then we've been working with State Representative Jordan Harris, who has introduced a co-sponsorship memo for the Nellie Bly Scholarship Funds. He is on the Board of Trustees at Millersville University, and he was a beneficiary of being able to go to an affordable college when he was younger, you know, 20 or 30 years ago. And so really in his heart understands this issue. And so he has a co-sponsorship memo as well. It's my kind of understanding with lawmakers that they like to have advocates build a runway and get things lined up that then they can kind of step into, and it makes it a lot easier for them to be champions if we can work on the front end and get champions in the real world who are going to be willing to support them if they make a tough decision. So I think that I'm hoping we'll see this in the budget again, and that everything, you know, it's like a sausage grinder in Harrisburg between May and June. And so things are introduced, people stake their claims, advocates make their case, and then people go behind closed doors in Harrisburg and they cut deals. And so I think right now we're the ones who need to start priming the pump to make this an issue that lawmakers are going to feel comfortable climbing on board with, so that they can go back to their districts and say, like, look, I'm going to support these scholarships for students because that's what's going to make a difference in the lives of my constituents. And, you know, we did a poll earlier this year and we found that 83% of Pennsylvanians support having this funding reallocated to a different use. And, you know, 82% of people supported having it part of it go to scholarships for students in college. And again, like, what do 83% of people agree on at all in any way in this world? And we just asked, you know, what should 240 million taxpayer dollars be used to subsidize the horse racing industry? And people were like, no, that shouldn't. And so I think that there is like a growing awareness in Harrisburg. So I can't, I'm sorry, Anita asked what the bill number is, and I don't have that bill number at my fingertips, but I'll send it out in a follow-up email tomorrow. Marilyn asked if there's an avenue to take regarding gambling addiction and make that a strong point. We haven't done that at Ed Voters, but we are definitely talking about horse racing as not as an agricultural, you know, like American flag and, you know, rolling fields of hay, but we talk about it as gambling. I mean, it is just part of this gambling industry that is, as you said, addictive, but we have not looked at it in terms of the using gambling addiction. So are there any other questions before we close this out tonight, or comments?
I think Gina has another one.
No, I didn't. I'm sorry.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to unraise your hand. Oh, there you go. Anything else? Because if not, I just would like to, oh, Linda, did you unmute? Would you like to say something? Nope, okay. Well, if there are no other comments, Patrick, do you have any final parting words that you'd like to say before we sign off?
Just that, look, it takes unrelenting pressure. It's all about pressure. Pressure politicians, pressure the media. You know, when I get media requests, you know, a lot of times they want to just focus on Bob Baffert or the latest drug scandal. And I always beseech them to look at the big picture. Don't miss the forest for the trees. And the big picture is that this is, again, animal exploitation, animal cruelty, and animal killing, and it cannot be fixed. It's wicked from the start, and it has to end. And that's the story here, not Bob Baffert, not a drug overage, not needles and syringes. The story is that horse racing is cruel and must end. So, and as far as the subsidies, just keep hammering away at your local, you know, your local legislators at the state level, and you know, we'll get there. It's, you know, things happen slowly in politics, as we all know, and we need to stay at it, because again, if not us, then who?
Thank you, Patrick. And I'm just putting in the chat. Someone asked if there's a way to access information on this call, and it's kidsoverhorseracing.org, and I will send out an email to everybody who registered so that you can find that. So I'm trying to type that in here before we sign off. And I just want to say again, like, I'm super grateful.
Yeah. Right, and our website again is horseracingwrongs.org. So all the information. I always say that the best argument against horse racing is the website. It's all there. It's irrefutable, and it's all facts. You know. One of my favorite quotes in history is John Adams: "Facts are stubborn things," and we present facts.
Yep, absolutely. And you know, without Patrick, I don't know that, you know, the Inquirer would have been on top of all these issues. And so you know, it takes a community. We have to be dogged. It's going to take some time, but you know, ultimately, I think when we look at Pennsylvania's like financial situation, it is going to become increasingly difficult for state lawmakers to justify spending this kind of money subsidizing a single industry that creates virtually no jobs and has so much cruelty and sends, you know, tens of millions of dollars out of the state every year. It's just a matter of like raising awareness so people understand what's happening, and that's right. Where we're going to start with us as our little core. So I will make sure I put horseracingwrongs.org in the chat. I will put their information in too tomorrow so that you can have everything. So tomorrow afternoon sometime, look for an email with all the links. And if anytime you have questions or anything like that, you can just contact me. So thank you for taking an hour out of your evening to come and talk about this. It's really important. And I hope everybody has a good night. So thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.